Hi, welcome to Spooky Owls. My name's David Saunderson. We've been off the air, if that's what you call it, on YouTube for a few months now, but we're really back in the swing of things with Halloween. So we're going to be having quite a few interviews with some spooky people from around Britain and Ireland over the next couple of weeks. First off, we're starting with a Somerset-based folklorist and author, Helen J.R. Bruce. She's going to be telling us all about black dogs around the British Isles and apparently they're not all Black Shuck, so she's going to tell us a little bit about that. So today we're talking to Helen J.R. Bruce. Hello, Helen. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are
Uh,
you?
I'm good, thank you. You're enjoying the spooky season, are you?
I'm well in swing. In fact, I don't know if
No,
you can see, but there's a little black dog on my cup.
that's very,
There
very,
he
very
is.
cool. That's cool. So, I mean, every day's Halloween on the Spooky Owls, so it's only just ramps up that extra little bit more at the moment. Now,
Sure.
I met you a few months ago at the ASAP Paranormal Conference down in Bath, and you're talking about folklore and things, and you've written a few articles in recent months for us with a real good focus on black dogs. So that's why I wanted to get you on today and tell us. Now, I understood, and I understand a bit more than I probably, but black dogs are unique to England, more or less, but they're not just Black Shuck. And the article you wrote for us told us such. Can you maybe explain, from a very base level, what is a black dog?
So first of all, I'm going to come in and just ruin what you said. They're not unique to England.
Okay, there you go. So you've
Um,
blown me out of the water already.
I'm so sorry. We definitely have our own take on them, and we have a huge concentration of black dogs and really different types of black dog folklore here in England. And across Ireland as well. But actually, black dogs are a worldwide phenomenon pretty much from the start of recorded history in various guises. That's a whole big conversation.
Well,
Yeah, no,
let's
they're
start that
everywhere.
conversation. Tell me, what are they like elsewhere? So, what is a black dog?
Just a few couple examples off the top of my head. You do get occasional similar reports in America and other countries, vaguely, of people will see a black dog out in the countryside down a lane. But then in Mexican folklore specifically, you have something called, and my pronunciation probably be terrible, but it's called a cadejo. I won't even try. Spelt cadejo. That's in a really English accent.
Yep.
But it comes in a black version and a white version, which is fascinating because actually some of our black dogs here in England sometimes turn up in white versions. And with the cadejo, the black version is seen as more malevolent and the white version is seen as more of a guide and helpful, which again we get even with black dogs here. Some of our black variants are terrifying omens of death, but some of our black dog variants, such as the Gert dog of the Mendip Hills in Somerset, a local one to me, are guides and seen as benevolent.
Okay. Well, so they are. So I was wrong. They've got them all over the place, but we have a lot of them here. So
A lot.
we still rule. Okay. When you say there's good black dogs and there's bad, or there's good and there's bad, again, I only thought they were bad. So maybe tell us what's the bad one. Tell us about Shark. Let's start with the most famous,
The
and we'll
most
move from there,
famous.
and then we'll find some good ones.
Of course. So Black Shuck, I was privileged actually. I visited Bungay, the town where supposedly Black Shuck raced into the church.
That's in Norfolk
Yeah, and attacked
or
the
Suffolk. I'm not sure.
congregation. It's in Suffolk.
Yep.
But he's reported in quite a few of the villages, not just Bungay. Bungay, they've really gone for it, almost a bit like Salem has gone for the witch trials. Bungay, all the businesses, the local businesses are called Black Dog something. They've got it on the weather vane, they've got it on buildings. Bungay have embraced it. And actually, they did a massive festival commemorating the attack for the first time this year.
Okay, that's cool.
which I'm hoping they're going to continue, because they're really kind of making a move to take back a bit of their folkloric heritage there, which I
Okay, can
think
you
is
tell
amazing.
people who are not aware of the attack what that was all about?
So supposedly, everyone was gathered for church, and there was this terrible scraping sound on the door of the church. And we did go, and I had a look at the church door, supposedly where it happened, and there are some marks. Whether we decide they're definitely scratches or not, there are some marks. And the door burst open, and the black dog supposedly raced down the carpet through the middle of the pews, which again I walked down. There's a beautiful hanging of the event in the church, embroidered. It's amazing. And people were struck dead by the dogs. He didn't touch them, but his very presence seemed to be so evil that they were struck dead at the time. And the later explanation, they figure, is maybe not it was a hellhound. They think it was maybe a case of ball lightning. They think maybe the church was struck by lightning, and maybe all that time ago it didn't have a very effective lightning rod to conduct it safely down. So that's the explanation, and that hasn't been proved as far as I know, but either it was the Hound of Hell, he raced into the church and his evil presence literally struck people dead at that very moment, or perhaps there was some kind of lightning, very rare lightning phenomenon.
So for our sake, let's say it was Black Shuck, the Hound of Hell. Now, you're saying that they go really big in Bungay, but they do in other parts of East Anglia as well, and I think they might even go down to Kent, and Essex. But is it the same dog? Is it supposed to be the same dog, or do they just refer to it as Black Shuck, or is it different names?
Really good question. Really, really hard to answer that. There are, I would say, hundreds, if not thousands, of reports of black dogs that may be different black dogs.
Yeah.
Or maybe some of them are the same one, appearing in
Yeah.
different areas. I grew up in Brentwood in Essex. So the black dog was very much a local story. And I, before I came on air, I just looked up a couple of really niche accounts, very, very local accounts. And there'll be certain roads. So there'll be a certain lane where the black dog will be seen. And there is an argument amongst folklorists of the idea that this type, if we'd have to split the black dog into various types of apparition. So there's a type that's tethered, and it will patrol its area. So that may be the area where it died, the area where it's buried, in which if this dog is linked to either, as I discussed in my article, if it's linked to a black dog that was buried specifically in a churchyard to act as a guardian, then that black dog is generally confined to its churchyard or maybe the roads nearby. Some of the ones that you'll see on trackways on certain roads are linked to where there used to be gallows. There's another type of black dog where potentially the suggestion is that it's the soul of someone who was killed, sometimes wrongfully, who hasn't been able to pass on and who then lingers but haunts the place where they were killed in the form of this black dog. So my gut feeling is that they're different, to be honest.
So there's lots of them, but we just use sometimes we use an overriding. We call them Black Shuck because that's what we call
the
them.
one we know.
We know, but there's also other ones in other, and I wasn't aware of this until I read your article. That I didn't until today. Obviously, I didn't know there was black dogs everywhere. But there's ones in other counties of England, even up north. They've got different names though. Can you tell us about them?
So absolutely, they've got really great names, and the ones that I mentioned in the article, I did 5 in that article, is only touching the surface. Some of them have got even more great names as well, but the one probably the most striking of those, because it's so different, which I'll mention first then, is the Black Dog of Newgate.
Yep.
Again, it's quite different because it's urban. I think often when we think of black dogs, it's like a a small country churchyard out in the middle of nowhere or a narrow country lane. But the Black Dog of Newgate is obviously associated with what was Newgate Jail in London.
In London, yep.
Very much an urban space, not associated with, it's nothing to do with a churchyard or a specific road, but in that story, supposedly, it's almost this shape-shifting ability. So this inmate, this scrawny scholar, is brought in, and the other inmates, they're starving. It was a horrific prison at the time. And they're desperate and they overpower this young man and supposedly they eat him. And then the next night, he reappears in the form of this totally murderous and unstoppable black dog. And he kills every single person who ate a piece of his flesh. And he doesn't stop in the prison. Anyone, he tracks them down. So supposedly this young man, interestingly a man, he was in prison accused of witchcraft. It comes out, at the end of the story. And it's the black dog that he chooses to come back in and wreak his revenge. So he's very different.
Yeah. So, really, some of these things, the only connection they appear to have is that they're canines. It's not the same as a black dog on the moor with red flaming eyes scaring the flipping heck out of a weary traveller. It's a different idea, isn't it?
It's almost death. Death seems to be the link. Death is the one thing that comes up. And that brings us all the way back if we think of Anubis. Again, there's discussion whether he's a jackal, whether he's a type of wolf. But probably one of the most ancient gods that we know in general society, because we learn about the Egyptians. He's canine, and obviously he's the god of the underworld. So this whole idea of canines you can trace with their link with being psychopomps, that means soul guides, their link with the afterlife and the process of crossing over, and almost the trauma of death. When death is traumatic, that seems to be when you might get a haunting where it's not the person, they come back in this canine, more animalistic form.
Why do you think that is? I just wonder whether, I'm trying to think, like in the olden days, the dangers that you might have seen out in the roadways or things, what kind of dangerous things might you have? A wolf or something like that? Could that have something to do with it?
From what I've looked into, it comes, the idea of death being the scariest thing we can imagine is quite modern, I think. So actually, if you trace it all the way back, the canine was, as humans, it was our first domesticated animal, our first sort of companion, first non-human companion. So the journey in folklore and myth and making sense of the world between humans and canines is so ancient that I think it more comes from a very ancient sense of comfort, I'd say, rather than fear. So you're going to believe that, Anubis is going to be there in the other world, and kind of the canine aspect is familiar, actually. Or in versions of the Wild Hunt, again, it splits. Some versions of the Wild Hunt, we have a pack of black dogs are very dangerous and deadly, but other versions, certainly more, the Welsh version is definitely more friendly. So they collect up souls around Samhain or Halloween, and they guide them to the other world. So again, the dog is a guide, it's a companion. It wasn't the dog that causes your death. I think that's more of a recent, in the grand scheme of things, more of a recent twist on it. So the dog accompanies you in your experience of death, perhaps. But now I think we've got a bit more wary, and we think the dog precedes or symbolizes the death.
Okay, so we'll get to the good ones, which they sound like the good ones, but you were talking about the bad ones before, and I want to continue with that because this is Spooky Isles, and we love good things, but we also like evil things. So tell us some more of the folk tales around Britain of black dogs that are actually evil. Hounds of Hell.
So it's a really good one in Dartmoor, actually. And again, this is very specifically Hounds of Hell, Hellfire and everything. Although they may or may not appear as black, but that can often happen. So again, you've got an article on the website by someone else, fantastic folklorist called Mark Norman, and he has spoken about this. So Squire Cabell of Dartmoor, again, I know all about him because he comes up as a villain in one of my books. He's fantastic. So he's really evil. It's a great story. So in life, he was supposedly not a very nice man. Potentially, he murdered his wife. Potentially. And he liked to do everything in excess, eat, drink, help himself to whatever he wanted, and he loved to hunt. And he would hunt on a Sunday. He would hunt whenever he wanted. And when he got told off for doing so, he basically said to the priest, like, I'll be damned, devil may take me, I'll hunt when I like, I'll do what I want, which we probably know from other stories are the famous last words. And when he eventually did die, because he'd been so notorious in his lifetime, the people of Buckfastleigh were concerned that he might be back. So fascinatingly, he's buried. He's got like a stone, like a normal grave, everything. But then also there's a building around with a big old oak door, and there's iron railings, so you can see in, but you can't get in. And he is well contained. And the story goes that even during the Second World War, when every single bit of metal was taken for the war effort, so, church fences, the works, they would not take the bars off Cabell's tomb because supposedly he returns in the dark, at dusk, at night time. He returns with his hounds, and the first thing you see is cast in hellfire, a shadow on the wall of the church opposite, which is a ruin supposedly burnt down by Satanists, whether it was.
Yeah.
But you see the shadow of this hellfire, you see the shapes of the hounds on the church wall, and then you very soon Cabell on his ghostly horse appears to lead this cursed hunt. And if you cross his path, you'll prey. Any prey will do. So your only hope is to run for your life, hide, get out of his way. And I did visit the churchyard at Buckfastleigh. It's probably the spookiest place I've ever been.
Okay, that's good. So where's that Buckfastleigh, and that's in Devon?
Buckfastleigh, yeah, it's in Devon. It's on the edge of the moor. And when we were exploring around there, it's stunning, super creepy. And the weirdest thing we saw was near Cabell's tomb, there was some hoof prints. But they didn't go anywhere.
That's
so they
cool.
Pranced around for a bit and then they stopped.
And went back to hell. That's pretty cool. So where's the dogs in that, though? I don't understand. Is it just because he's got dogs, or he turns into a dog?
So he has a whole pack of hounds.
Okay.
So him and he would have been, at the time, he would have been fox, maybe deer hunting when he was alive. Okay. But because he gets cursed by the devil to carry on. He's so evil and he's made so much fun of church and all of the rules that the devil's like, carry on then.
Yeah.
So he becomes an agent of the demonic. His hounds become an agent of the demonic, and they basically, carry out some amusement for the devil.
Okay. So again, this is a very different to being protected by. So there's lots of black dogs out there. We say black or hounds of hell or white dogs or whatever they might be, but they've all got different purposes. They're not one of the same.
And whether they began as real flesh and blood dogs that became a ghost, or whether they were spiritual to begin with or ghostly to begin with.
Because they sound like they would be I don't know what the word is, demons, or they'd be directed by Cabell to do the nasty work. Whereas you have the lone dogs out there, staring down someone with their fiery eyes and.
They're more like an agency. When you get the single dogs, they're doing their own thing. They've got their own agenda. But when you get the packs, generally, they're very rarely you'll get packs, loose packs of dogs, either black or white, much rarer. Yeah. I was just reading about one, and apparently this phantom pack of white dogs near the coast supposedly foretold a storm.
Yeah.
Generally, with a pack, it's got a human leader.
Okay, so they literally are just a ghost of something, like if you had an army or something like that. They're part of a thing. So, tell us about the ones in Yorkshire. I think there's the Skriker.
Skriker.
Or is that Lancashire? I'm not quite sure. You said the north of England.
So we've got Barguess, we've got Skriker, and they come up slightly varied where they are reported. But they share a lot of characteristics with Shuck, but not quite the same. So Skriker is one of the really interesting ones in the fact, again, he can be urban at times. You don't just see him out and about in dark lanes. If you do, obviously, he's an unpleasant sight, strikes fear into you. But the other thing he does, and maybe some kind of folk memory there of other types of black dogs are kind of influenced. But you hear his screaming. He's the one that's really, really loud. You might hear his screech or his howl rather than actually physically see him. And he's the one, I believe, as well, that leads a funeral procession through. So he'll come into town and he'll potentially lay across the threshold of someone who is soon to die, or a house where someone has just died. But also he'll gather up. And this is interesting because a lot of the other black dogs, flesh and blood dogs, are scared of them. And if you're walking with your dog and you come across an apparition, the dog's scared. But with Skriker, he supposedly will lead like a procession of the local stray dogs or any dogs that are out through the town, howling when there's been like a notable death.
So again, a very different from other ones. So everyone has a different story. They're not this idea that. And I've always, you sometimes hear that you still hear stories like that to this day. Someone says they saw a really big, scary-looking dog somewhere, and I just think it's probably just a big, scary-looking dog. I don't know. What do you generally think of all this, though? Like, obviously, they've all got different tales, but there must be some basis to it in some kind of reality. What do you think?
So, briefly, what we touched on earlier, and what I speak about in my article about the Grimm.
There's two articles, by the way. You keep referring, you're flicking back and forward, but you did one about the Grimm, which are explain what a Grimm is.
So the Grimm is basically, you've probably heard about it in Harry Potter. He is the guardian of a specific churchyard. So his full name would be the Churchyard Grimm. And he comes from the idea that there was a belief that when they built a new churchyard, the first body buried there would have to protect all the following ones.
Do they still do that? Do you think they still do that? I always wondered that with my grandmother, because my grandmother, when she died in the early 70s, and it wasn't a very old cemetery, this in Scotland. I always thought, because I knew this about how they bury a dog first to be the thing. Do they still do it?
There are whispers, until fairly recently, suggestions that they would. And it's going to depend on the strength of folkloric belief in the area, because obviously it's pretty barbaric to catch a black dog and kill it and bury it in the church.
Well, is it a black dog or is it just any dog?
It has to be black.
Oh, there you go. That's a bit.
But I mean, in other countries, and maybe in some occasions here, there are other weird practices, foundation sacrifices that also involve children. So
okay, well, I'm sure that doesn't happen here.
that you know, hopefully that one stopped. Hopefully they've all stopped. I think it's unlikely. I think probably now we'd be at the point that if the people involved in building the churchyard felt strongly about that, they would have maybe a local witch or other relevant person create some kind of figure, some kind of magical figure, and bury that.
I would have just thought there'd be enough animals dying every day that you've got to bury them somewhere. In there, you put them in the churchyard. So I don't see it that barbaric, but I didn't realise it had to be a black dog. I just thought it had to be something that wasn't human, because if it was human, that poor sod would be the one that'd be having to guard the cemetery for the rest of eternity. So anyway, I moved from there. You were telling me something. I asked what you thought of all of this and about the basis for reality.
So it's linked. So we know there were these practices of immurement, of burying black dogs, generally black dogs specifically here in the UK, in the north part of churchyards, and also occasionally in the walls, walling them up in new buildings like big abbeys, big churches. So we know that we've had a long tradition of putting this or ascribing these like magical or supernatural powers to black dogs and symbolically burying them places. So I don't feel it's that great a stretch of the imagination to believe that these black dogs would have lingered, because the practice wasn't a one-off. You know, it was something that was widespread, believed in, and carried out. So there's got to be a shred of, well, there must have been belief at the time, and of all the different, you know, ghost sightings and everything, I think black dogs are one of the most credible.
I just wonder. I mean, you say sometimes you see these. You see people claim to have seen big-looking, scary dogs out in the out in the forest or in the out in the parks or whatever it might be, and whether it's actually some kind of there are always these big cats that go missing from army bases and things like that. So it may well be those kind of things they still see. What do you think of that idea?
There's definitely become a bit of a crossover. You've got, you know, again in Dartmoor, you've got the beast of Dartmoor, which is supposedly a big cat, a black one. But then you've also got various sightings of black dogs associated as well. And whether it's in some cases the same thing, and it's different people's interpretation of what they saw, you know, from a distance.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's more like you'd assume you'd see a big dog rather than a mountain lion or a puma or something, wouldn't you? I mean, I would assume if I saw something big, I think it was a dog as opposed to a cat. So if I did see a big cat, I'd think it was a dog.
Yeah, and we know that, well, or we're pretty sure that people did release their collection.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the 70s there was some law or something changed, and they're all going to get fined. So they just, as you do, you leave a vicious beast out in the countryside. But that doesn't really explain the olden days. But then when did wolves? When did Britain stop having mainland? Britain stop having wolves out there.
I don't know that date off the top of my head.
Okay, but I think it is a while back though, isn't it? We're talking hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah, a long time.
It is. So, but then I suppose people still think about it. We still think of wolves. So, and we don't have wolves in.
That's pretty deep in our, our subconscious memory, actually.
Yeah.
But then I'd say that black dogs are one of the, if we're looking at sort of a folkloric consciousness, if we're looking at archetypes that are almost universal, the black dog is one of those ones that just, it's there. It's there in the subconscious almost, the association, even if you sort of maybe haven't heard many of these stories. It's a symbol that
people are scared of dogs. I mean, I got bit in the arse by a dog once, my mate's dog, and it was a big Doberman, and it, I still remember it. Wasn't pleasant, and I turned around because it started growling at me, and I turned around and went, took a big chunk out of me backside. So, but I mean, I imagine if you're out there, other than humans, there's not that many dangerous things, and the only dangerous thing might be a wolf or a dog. or maybe something else. I can't think. An angry badger or an uppity squirrel. I don't know, but even though I think
Some of the big deer are quite dangerous. Red
are
deer.
they? Yeah, okay, but probably they're out in the middle there. You don't have to go searching for them, don't you? So, whereas I saw a fox the other night when I wasn't very far away from this. That was a bit scary. Anyway, I'm just a bit of a wuss. All right, so Helen, you've gone through some wonderful tales there, and I'm going to put all the links. You've done a number of articles, and I'm going to link to them down there, and I'll also link to your book. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your book, because I know you merge a lot of this folklore that you're discussing into your fiction. Can you tell us a little bit about like how what we've talked about today, has affected the fiction that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got 2 books out of my it's the Heat of the Hunt trilogy. The first book is called Heat of the Hunt, and the second book is called Lie of the Land, and I'm working on the third one. And they're set mainly in Dartmoor, but we also go over to Ireland and we go briefly into London. And I spent about 10 years, a little bit longer, researching loads and loads of British folklore. And I just came across more and more mentions of black dogs. And I visited Dartmoor a lot of times. And I really got into learning about our version of the wild hunt, which crosses over. We've mentioned it sort of briefly, crosses over with black dog folklore. Obviously, with the wild hunt, you get a pack sometimes of black dogs.
Yeah.
And as I learnt about these stories in Dartmoor, I wanted us to sort of approach them in a contemporary way. I think it's so important for us to continue to engage with folklore because it has such a strong history of being retold and growing and adapting and changing with the society that it's linked to. And it's just a big way, I think, of how we make sense of the world. So I wanted to retell some of these stories in like a easy to read, modern way. So it's less concerned with their history. It's less concerned to pinning the stories to an exact time point. But in the book, all of the locations that I mentioned are real. It's set modern day, and the idea is someone will read the book and think, "Oh, that's a fascinating story that's being alluded to," and then they can go to that place. They can go to Hound Tor in Dartmoor. They can go to Wistman's Wood. So yeah, it's really important to retell the stories and get them talked about, much like your website.
Yeah.
Keep
So
going.
that sounds great. I mean, understanding that these places that we live in modern times are not that far away from all these old beliefs. Your local park, which is could be next to the Sainsbury's or something like that. Something may have happened, and you're finding those things out. So, what's your next? Is the next book going to have as much to do with the black dogs, or did they move in different directions? Your books?
No, so it all centres around Gabriel, who is it's a regional variant of one of the names for one of the masters of the wild hunt in Dartmoor, and he's one of the main characters in it, and it follows his journey leading up until in the third book. It's going to be this kind of time of year, Samhain, and it's time for him to actually lead the hunt across Dartmoor. But as you can imagine, there's all manner of issues along the way and other stories and humans getting dragged into all of this drama and other stuff having to be fixed. So no, we're building up and we're going to actually go on the wild hunt with him in the third book.
Sounds very exciting. So we'll have to get you back, and maybe we might have a chat about the wild hunt as an idea in another time. So because I'm really quite interested, I know about as much as Hern the Hunter type stuff, but I don't know enough about it. That's why I need to talk to you. So thank you, Helen J.R. Bruce. Thank you for being a guest today, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. See you later.